So, should you homeschool geometry before Algebra 2? The answer is yes. Of course, there's always exceptions, but in general, definitely for the most part, for the majority of people out there, you should homeschool geometry before Algebra 2. So, I'm going to get into three reasons why, three important reasons. And the number one motivation for me to make this video is this is a very, very common question that comes up. It's a great question, actually. And there's a lot of confusion sometimes out there that can really get homeschooling parents, into trouble with their children if they don't know all the factors they should be considering, whether their child should go after Algebra 1, go into geometry, or Algebra 2. Of course, I'm going to get into three powerful reasons that, yes, you should homeschool geometry before Algebra 2, but we'll take those one at a time. But before we start, let me go ahead and introduce myself. My name is John. I'm the founder of TabletClass Math. I'm also a middle and high school math teacher. I've been constructing, I have several online math courses, but been involved in homeschooling mathematics for a good 15 plus years. And my TabletClass Math courses have been out there for a long time. They have a strong reputation. So if you haven't heard of TabletClass Math in terms of your homeschooling, I'm going to leave a link to my homeschool math program in the description of this video, and hopefully you'll consider checking out or evaluating my program to see if they might be right for your child. Okay, so let's get into homeschooling geometry before Algebra 2, why you should do this. Now, let me just give you another little bit of background how I'm answering this question. I'm answering this question from experience, okay, and seeing students teaching, middle grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade, ninth, 10th, 11th, 12th, seeing kids go off to college, being a parent myself, and just generally being involved with homeschooling for several years. So I'm not just kind of theoretically making this up. These are, this is based upon actual experience, not only, again, as a teacher, but as someone who understands mathematics and what's being taught in these particular courses. Okay, so let's get to it. So what is the first reason? The first reason you should homeschool geometry before Algebra 2 is the SAT or ACT, okay? So these are college entrance exams, and this is a really powerful reason. So let's just kind of go up here real quick. And this isn't the case for everyone, but for the most part, this is generally where people, students are taking these courses. So at ninth grade, most students are taking Algebra 1. All right, so here we have 10th grade, and we're trying to figure out what comes next. Okay, are we going to do geometry or are we going to do Algebra 2? But let's continue on with this kind of little model here. Here we have the 11th grade, and here we have someone's senior year, okay? Now let's just jump forward here, okay? In your 11th grade year, students at this year, not in their senior year, but this year, right here, generally the second semester of their 11th grade year is where they'll be taking the SAT or ACT. Now, of course, there's been a lot of crazy changes, what's been going on with disruptions in schools, etc. But the SAT and ACT, they're not going away. Okay, they'll always, some colleges saying, oh, we're not going to use it, or there's always going to be some sort of college entrance exam. Okay, and typically, for the most part, students really start taking these tests in the 11th grade because in 12th grade, early on, your student can get early acceptance into a college and be all done. Now, if they're still working at going to a college or figuring out what college you're doing, they can continue on and still take SATs and ACTs in their 12th grade year. But all this starts in the 11th grade year. Okay. Now, I'm going to make my point here in a second. Okay. So why geometry then and not algebra 2? Well, the SAT and the ACT, and this is, like very, like a rough kind of ratio, but I would say probably it's like 60% algebra, okay, and maybe like 40% geometry on these exams. Now, one thing I want to say before I even get any further down along this line, let's say you're a homeschool parent, okay, and you're like, your child's finishing up Algebra 1. You're like, no way my kid's going to college, or he doesn't want to go, or she doesn't want to go. She's going to go into technical school or whatever. You know, you still want to be prepared, okay, just in case your child, changes their mind about college, right? So just because you're saying, oh, my child's going to go right in the military, they don't need it, doesn't make a difference. You still want to follow this track because things can change, all right? Absolutely. I've seen it through the years over and over and over again. So don't just whatever your child's interest is, at ninth grade has nothing to do where things might be, in a year or two from now. They might be like, hey, my friends are going to college, and I really now want to be a, electrical engineer. So just don't know, and you don't want to be caught kind of flat-footed if that's the case, right? So having a kind of general college prep approach, even though your child isn't going to college, is still going to benefit them. Okay. All right. So back to the SAT and ACT. So on these tests, it's like 60% algebra, maybe 40% geometry, maybe even like 50-50. Okay. But I think it tilts a little bit more towards the algebra side. Now, the SAT and ACT are different. And don't take these percentages as exact, precise percentages, but generally speaking, there is going to be a considerable amount of geometry. Okay, so let's just think about this. If you took Algebra 2 in 10th grade, okay, and you're in 11th grade and you're taking geometry, how well is your child going to be prepared when they're taking the SAT or ACT when they still haven't completed geometry? Okay, so they're learning geometry at the same time they're taking the SAT and ACT, which is asking them a bunch of geometry questions. Okay, so this is a thing you got to be thinking about, right? So the reason why you got to answer this, really be clear, answer this question correctly, is you got to look forward. What are some of the things your child's going to be facing? All right. Again, just assume that they very well might take the SAT or ACT, and you want them to have already completed geometry. So it would be nice if they took geometry in the 10th grade because they would have Algebra 1 and geometry. Most of the algebra that a student's going to see on the SAT or ACT is going to be a large majority of it is going to be Algebra 1. There are some Algebra 2 concepts, but if your child really like aced Algebra 1 and geometry, then they have the bulk of the math skills behind them, okay, as they go into their 11th grade year. All right, so hopefully you can see why it's definitely advantageous to take geometry at the 10th grade year or after Algebra 1, whenever this may be. Now, I will say the traditional approach to education has always been Algebra 1 geometry, then Algebra 2. Okay, so just based upon traditional pattern of education, that's the way to go. But I'm giving you specific reasons, additional reasons, factors that will strengthen the case to again homeschool geometry before Algebra 2. All right, so let's move on to our next reason, and that is algebra burnout. Now, again, there are always exceptions. There are times where someone might want to do Algebra 2 right after Algebra 1. There's been very few special exceptions that I'm not going to get into them, but if if you're in a situation where you think you may need to do that and you want to consider my program, just go over to our site and use our contact form or reach out to me. So everything's done on a case-by-case basis. So there are exceptions. One exception might be that, hey, you have to get Algebra 2 done, for college credit, whatever the case is. But I will say this much. Let me just speak to these exceptions. If you're going to do Algebra 2 right after Algebra 1, then the only time I've seen this really, really work well is if a student, is up against some sort of graduation requirement. And typically, they'll also be taking geometry. So you could be learning Algebra 2 and geometry at the same time. You can kind of double up on your math courses. Let's just say that much. But as a general rule, going from Algebra 1 to Algebra 2 and then geometry is definitely not the best route to go. And that brings us to our second reason, algebra burnout. Okay, so let's just take a look at how algebra works. So we have pre-algebra, we have algebra 1, and we have algebra 2. Okay, so in algebra 1, and I've taught all these courses, so I mean, I've built curriculums here, so I know what I'm talking about. So in pre-algebra, okay, when student learns pre-algebra, they're kind of learning algebra light. Let's just kind of say it that way. So when they get to algebra 1, they're going to review all of pre-algebra concepts effectively, and then they're going to add, you're going to extend your knowledge on that. Okay, so here, for example, in pre-algebra, you might get an introduction to systems. Okay, that's one topic. But in algebra 1, you really go deep into that topic. So you're going to kind of repeat pre-algebra, and then you're going to do more algebra. Okay, so same thing for algebra 2. Algebra 2, you're going to repeat all of algebra 1, more or less, and then you're going to put on top of that more advanced algebra concepts. So algebra is a continuum, okay? So we have pre-algebra, algebra 1, algebra 2. It's one big algebra continuum. And as students, if they learn pre-algebra, then they go to algebra 1, then they go to algebra 2, they're just doing algebra. It can kind of tend to bore students, or they're like, oh, I've seen this. And that's not good to keep students motivated or interested in mathematics. Geometry is an excellent break because conceptually you're doing all kinds of different stuff. You're talking about shapes, and here geometry is typically where you're introduced to trigonometry. You're introduced to concepts like reasoning, proof, and theorems, and etc. So is very important, and it's a nice break to not only from the algebra, but it's a way too you can apply what you learned in algebra 1. So in geometry, you do need to have some basic algebra skills, okay, because you're solving equations and stuff, but it's the application of algebra. So you don't want to have algebra burnout. Again, pre-algebra, algebra 1, algebra 2, that's 3 years of algebra, and you're kind of, again, doing stuff, repeating, learning, repeating. You can definitely tend to burn a student out with the algebra. Okay, so let's take a look at our last reason, and there's other reasons I'm sure, but these are the big main ones, and that is pre-calculus and or statistics. Okay, so let's go back up to our little handy-dandy chart here. So let's erase this, and let's assume, okay, for a moment, that your child is going to take as much math as they can in high school, right? So they're going to take algebra 1, geometry, algebra 2. Let's just not talk about the order here for a second. And then at the 11th grade year, okay, they're either going to take pre-calculus or they might take a statistics course, all right? So if they take pre-calculus, that sets them up for calculus, okay, at the senior year. And this is an accelerator track. Definitely not uncommon for students to take AP Calc 1 and 2 and get credit, at their senior year. So if you got a student, a homeschooler, on your hands that loves math and wants to be an engineer or whatever, this could be their track, right? This is not uncommon. When you go to any very good high school in the country, there are going to be students taking calculus in their senior year, right? So, but to get to this point, you will have to have taken pre-calculus, okay? Which means if you're taking pre-calculus here, you had to complete these other courses. All right, so let's assume for a second that your child did algebra 2 here, and let's kind of like scratch the calculus, and did geometry here, and then they were going to take pre-calculus in their senior year. Okay, let's just kind of look at this kind of track. This is kind of a pretty typical track where a lot of students might end up taking pre-calculus or even statistics in their senior year. Now, if they did this track, algebra 1, algebra 2, and then geometry, well, here's the deal, okay? You are a year out from really doing heavy-duty algebra. In pre-calculus is an extension of a lot of topics that we learned in algebra 2. Things like logarithmic, exponential functions, matrices. Things that are taught in algebra 2 are generally retaught inside of a pre-calculus curriculum. Of course, pre-calculus has a lot of additional things like more advanced trigonometry, um, etc. There's other more advanced topics, but you are covering or redoing a lot of the topics that you need that you covered in Algebra 2. And pre-calculus is, that's a pretty challenging course. You got to be up to speed, ready to go as a math student. So your algebra skills, you want them to be fresh and, sharp. Okay. Now you can see the problem here. If you haven't been doing Algebra 2 for a year, you're going to be rusty on your algebra. Even if you did very good, a student was going to be rusty, okay, on all these algebra skills. Now, geometry is important, but geometry, the concepts you learn in geometry are not going to be nearly directly applicable inside your pre-calculus course as your Algebra 2 concepts. So, this is not the smartest way to go. So let's just kind of reverse this here. Okay, and we put geometry here and Algebra 2 there. Now look what happens, okay? Student comes out of Algebra 2, they take their little summer break, and they roll right into pre-calculus, but they're fresh with their algebra skills. They've been doing a lot of more advanced algebra inside of Algebra 2, which is going to directly benefit them for pre-calculus or statistics. And the statistics is different than pre-calculus for sure. But again, statistics is still using a lot of algebraic equation solving, working with variables, etc. You're not really going to be doing like area and volume. Although there are some basic concepts, and statistics is kind of its own math in and of itself. But I would say the majority of students are going to be looking to take pre-calculus. Now, another reason is the following. Let's say Algebra 2 is at someone's senior year, okay? So let's say they're taking Algebra 2 here. That would be their last course in high school. Well, if you go off to college, your first course is going to probably be something like a college algebra, which is effectively equivalent to like a high school Algebra 2. Okay, that would be like generally the minimum requirement for any kind of, even community college program, etc. And of course, there's always exceptions, but again, these are, what I'm telling you here is going to work for, going to be applicable for the majority of students as they kind of matriculate through the system. And if your child decides, you know what, I'm not going to go to college afterwards, guess what? You still have a strong math foundation to go back and do anything with, especially if you're going on to any kind of technical school, even a military. Okay, I know this because I was in the military. I was in the Marine Corps and I was in the Navy as an officer, and the Marine Corps as an enlisted person. But you have to take this test called the ASVAB if you're going into the military. And today's military is super high tech. Yes, and you need to know math. Okay, the more math you know, the more job openings you have available to you as you're going into the military. So bottom line is this: you as the homeschooling parent have to be, you have to be your child's guidance counselor. So of course, homeschooling has a ton of benefits to it. It can absolutely be extremely effective. You can give your child a great education, but you watching this video, you're doing the right thing. You're doing your research, etc. So, hopefully, this is a pretty convincing argument, but go ahead and get other opinions on it. Maybe you might find some other reasons that maybe I didn't cover, to maybe do Algebra 2 before geometry. Of course, again, if you want to consider using my TabletClass Math program and you have specific questions on this, go ahead and reach out in our contact form and we'll get back to you. So let's go ahead and wrap up this video. So I'm going to leave a link to my homeschool program, my courses, in the description of this video. So if that's something you want to check out, definitely, would love you to come by and check out our free previews for our courses, etc. If you enjoyed this video, definitely appreciate a thumbs up and consider subscribing, as I'm always doing math-related videos and homeschooling as a particular topic of interest, because, I've been working with homeschoolers for many years, and I try to, help with guidance the best I can. And then leave me some feedback. What do you think? Just kind of answer your question. Do you still have more questions? Again, if you specifically want to consider my courses, um, go ahead and go to our site and leave me your question in our contact form, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. But with that being said, I definitely wish you all the best in your homeschooling adventure. This is a great question, okay, by the way. So if you were like, if it wasn't so obvious to you, like, hey, should I do geometry before algebra 2, etc.? No, that's an excellent question. So it just shows that, hey, by virtue of you searching out information on this question, that you're doing all the right things as a homeschool parent. All right, so with that being said, I appreciate your time and have a great day.